Thank you everyone for joining us on this episode of Voices of the River. My name is Sam Frith and my co-host today is Jennifer Lanham. We both work with Even Load Catchment Partnership. And today I'm really excited to announce today's guest, who is Geoff Tombs from Windrush Against Sewage Pollution. Geoff has been working alongside WASP for 4 years now and has gained a huge amount of knowledge and experience in his time with WASP. He's mainly focusing on the hydrological workings of sewage treatment works. Geoff compares the sewage permits along with sort of the flow and the population data, all gained via freedom of information requests. And by doing this, Geoff can then see if the sewage treatment works are working as they should. And if he finds that there is some evidence that they may not be doing this, then he's in a position to ask the relevant questions of the water companies. So today we're going to be running things a little bit differently because we're going to be trying to provide you with the tools, the knowledge, and give you the confidence to be able to adopt your own sewage treatment works. So Geoff, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for that intro. Good afternoon, everybody. The purpose of today's webinar is to give you an idea of the kind of information that you are able to get under freedom of information or environmental information requests that is readily or supposedly readily available for you to be able to analyze and deal with any problems in the area of your particular interest. Now, each and every one of you will have an area that you're particularly interested in. And what I'm presenting today is actually quite wide-ranging. So if you have any specific questions relating to an area of interest, put your hand up, ask a question, and by all means, keep in contact with me and talk to me afterwards. Now, I'm basically going off the notes which Sam is making available to you. All the communications you'll be making will be using the freedom of information and environmental information requests. These requests should be answered within 20 working days, and unless the request is complex, an extension can be applied for up to 40 days, but you have to be notified accordingly. And I'll read to you the Freedom of Information Act and the Environmental Information Regulation Act. This gives the public the right to request information held by public authorities. However, both acts have exemptions and exceptions to this right. I won't tell you what those exceptions are. They're readily available in the ICO Information Commission officers website, and there is a link in my document for that. Now, for the sake of freedom of information and environmental information, water and sewage providers are classified as public authorities. I've included in my documents the email addresses for all the English water companies. Bear in mind, in our area, Thames Water, we are... Sorry, did somebody... Sorry. Bear in mind that in our area, right in the middle of the country, we're bordered by quite a lot of the other sewage providers, Anglian Water, Severn Trent, Wessex Water, and Southern Water. You may feel, and particularly Severn Trent, because they do border very much the Moreton and Marsh area, you need to contact them at some time. Now, a lot of the work I do is via the Environment Agency, and primarily it's getting copies of environmental permits. There's one important thing that you can do when you're out in the field. And if you were to spot something like Sam has recently at Moreton in the Marsh, there's an Environment Agency incident hotline telephone number. And that's listed in my document. It's a very simple one, 0800 80 70 60. If you see a possible pollution incident, you need to report it using this hotline number. When you do this, ask for a name of the operator. and get an NIRS number, which is a National Incident Reporting System number. And this is in order that you can track what's happening. Where possible, give a grid reference or a WASP word. And if the incident involves a water body, you're automatically going to be asked, is there any evidence of distressed or dead fish? This is the point at which you say there are none to be killed or in a distressed condition. The problem with being asked that question is that if you see no instance of dead or distressed fish, the Environment Agency almost automatically recategorize the incident to a Cat 3 from what should be a Category 2 incident, and in doing that, they don't have to attend. Your job is to be pretty insistent, get some numbers, support it with photographs, and try and get them to categorize it to 2. There's also a general EIR request at the Environment Agency head office. If you've got any procedural questions, I would recommend that you put it through inquiries@environmentagency.gov. That's included on my document. Now, I've also included all the regional office numbers, email contacts. There are 14 Environment Agency offices. The one that we will deal with, or you will deal with primarily, is pre-listed as THM, that's Thames. It's based in Wallingford, and it's responsible for all the administration in our area. Now, if you're going to adopt a sewage treatment work, and I think that is absolutely fantastic. I work right across the country. I deal with hundreds of sewage treatment works, and I can't devote enough attention to any one of them. So if any of you are really going to adopt a sewage treatment works, I applaud that. It's going to be fantastic to have somebody on the ground looking almost on a daily basis for problems, fielding the problems, dealing with Thames Water if there are problems. Now, what you're going to need to kick that off is a copy of the current valid permit for that particular sewage treatment works, or any sewage treatment works in the locality that you are also interested in, and which are also going to impact into the waterway that you're dealing with. Now, there's a register of all environmental permits, and it's in the public register. I've got in my document the steps you need to take to access particular permits. It's a lengthy process, and you can wait up to 20 days to get a copy of the permit. Read carefully what I've put in there, but first and foremost, if you've got a specific permit you're interested in, drop me an email. I've probably got it. I've got hundreds and hundreds in my library.
I'm also going to jump in there. I've just reshared that document in the chat for people listening. If they want to go into a chat, we've got that document in there for you.
Excellent. Okay. Now, once you've got those permits, there'll be specific areas of interest to you. Now, mine is the hydraulics. It's the flow through the works. It's the flow to full treatment, which is the point at which the sewage treatment works are allowed to divert to storm facilities. Now, for some of you, the emission limits will be of particular interest. Now, Rob's in the audience here, and he's an absolute expert. Rob, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I'm here.
Are you happy for people to contact you if they've got specific queries in relationship to emission and emission limits?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, please do.
That's fantastic. As I say, you know, I'm not a biologist. I'm not a chemist. I'm actually a publisher, so help.
And
Okay.
just quickly, just can we just cover why we're looking at permits? You know, why would we want to start investigating our local sewage treatment works?
Right, you're looking at permits because contained within them are the statutory limits that the individual sewage treatment works should be operating to. At the basic level, smaller sewage treatment works will be working on limits for the biological oxygen demand and suspended solids. That's basically the murkiness. Slightly bigger sewage treatment works will have ammonia limits and in some instances phosphate limits. I can't help but interject and say Thames Water promised phosphate stripping along most of the even load and reneged on that last year. And besides those limits, in bigger works, you'll get limits for metals, cadmium, etc. They are of less interest to us. One thing you must understand is there are no permit limits for things like antimicrobials, all the nasties in there. There is no limit whatsoever. The second limits within a permit are hydraulic limits. So for argument's sake, there's a thing called the dry weather flow, or DWF. Now that is the expected flow into a sewage treatment works on a day when there is no rain. It does include external influences such as trade effluent, if it's appropriate, and a calculated dry weather infiltration. Infiltration is probably the scourge of our area. A lot of our sewage treatment works in our area are heavily impacted by dry weather infiltration. Notable Moreton in the Marsh, Bourton on the Water, Cirencester. Bourton on the Water has dry weather infiltration at a greater rate than the normal incoming sewage from the domestic population. It's eye-watering. The second hydraulic limit in most works, now I'll tell you in a minute why I say most works, is what is known as the full flow to full treatment, FFT, or passed forward flow rate. This is the incoming rate of sewage into an inlet works in a sewage treatment works, and beyond this limit, it's at that point that the sewage works is permitted to divert to storm facilities. Now, those storm facilities, in ideal conditions, are a holding facility. They're tanks. They receive the excess flow above the flow to full treatment rate, and they store in storm tanks. You've all heard of storm tanks. The excess, and in the ideal conditions, will return the stored storm sewage back into the flow of full treatment. Unfortunately, what is happening far too often is the storm tanks are filling, and it's at that point that they start to spill to the environment. It's also at that point that the event duration monitors, some of you will have heard about EDM, it's the point at which a sonar device detects the spill to the environment, and it's all those hours that we see publicly put out on an annual basis from the Environment Agency, and which are very controversial at the moment. Now, there are some works which do not have storm treatment facilities, and they're known as treat-all works. They tend to be small. They do what it says on the tin. They treat everything that comes in. Unfortunately, under conditions of stress, they can surcharge badly or back up into the public, back up into the network from which the sewage has come. I've seen this happen before. Interestingly, Moreton in Marsh is a treat-all works, despite it being relatively large. You probably most of you know the land treatment area near to Primrose Court at Morton-in-Marsh. That is the only storm facilities within Morton-in-Marsh and the network. It is quite unusual. Sewage works who have storm facilities, by and large, utilize storm tanks. There are some that don't have storm tanks, and they actually discharge storm sewage into land treatment areas or reed beds. And there are one or two that both have storm tanks and land treatment areas. So the land treatment areas are acting as what we call polishing. They're almost a tertiary kind of treatment. There's a formula for storm discharge facilities or storm tanks. There are two in actual fact, and one of them takes 68 litres per second of the head of population treated, and the other is 2 hours of the flow to full treatment figure. And you'd be surprised if you run both those formula how different they can be in a single treatment works. Now, this reminds me, I've got for most treatment works, and particularly in our area, crib sheets. It has all the formula, all the population equivalents, all the emission limits, historical PE, which is the number of population treated. It has trade, effluent where appropriate. So I'd urge you, if you are adopting a works and you're interested in it and any of the works near to it, ask me and you can have my crib sheet. It's a good basis on which to start.
Thank you.
Now, at some stage, those of you that are interested are all going to be dealing with a water company. And in this instance, it's almost certainly going to be Thames Water. Thames Water have been in the past years very cooperative and have gone above most of the other water companies in their responses and their openness. And I applaud them for that. I've got a very good working relationship with the EIR department. But it's important when you're sending an EIR in to a water company that you are accurate in your request and very specific about what you're asking for. I've had instances in the early days where I asked Southern Water for its population equivalent across the whole of its network and all the treatment works it was serving. And they duly sent me a list from which each and every treatment works name had been redacted, and they just left a reference number. So it was impossible for me to do anything with it. So I urge you, particularly if you're asking for data and strings of data, you ask for it in Excel or .csv format so that you can sort and analyze it as appropriate. The kind of things you can ask a WASP, water and sewage company, known as WASCs, for are details of their stop-start, EDM data, that's when they spill start and spill stop. You can ask them for flow data, both in 15-minute and daily format. This is useful if you're looking for illegal spilling, early or dry spilling. Now, there are two kinds of spills. You've all heard of spills, and they're very much in the forefront at the moment. If a treatment works spills when there has been no rain or less than 0.25 of a millimeter of rain in the previous 2 days, and it hasn't reached its flow to full treatment level, that is known as a dry spill. If a treatment works is found to be diverting to storm facilities before it has reached its flow to full treatment level, that is known as early spilling, or in the trade, flow clipping. it's also possible to simultaneously dry and early spill. The kind of data you're going to need to actually identify those kind of illegal activities are very complex. A year's worth of 15-minute flow data is 37,000 lines long, and it takes it takes a fair amount of computer power to analyze it. And another useful thing you can have, if you are interested in your local works spilling, is it spilling dry, is to have access to a local rainfall station. I use a thing called Wonder. There are stations all over the Cotswolds. They have historical data. If you're doing analysis on a previous year, they are very useful in determining dry spills. There's another thing which can be of use. If you've got a works that you're really interested in and concerned about, one thing you can do is ask the Environment Agency if they have made any compliance assessment report visits to the particular site. And these can be either reactive, i.e., there's been a self-reporting of a problem or a public reporting of a problem, or they can be routine. Routine is when the Environment Agency just stump up at a treatment works, go round and look at it, make notes, take photographs, make recommendations, and take any necessary steps that they feel are appropriate if the works isn't operating correctly. If you're asking for compliance assessment reports, my recommendation would be to ask for right back to 2010, because a lot of treatment works will not have had a compliance assessment visit in the last 15 years.
Oh.
They're very, very thin on the ground. Now, the agency tell us they're putting 500 more members of staff in position to try and increase the level of inspections and enforcement. We'll believe it when we see it. You can also contact Ofwat. Ofwat are now very much more in the frame. They've been a bit asleep on the job over past years. Their obsession has been with keeping water bills down, which they've managed to do very successfully, but unfortunately to the expense of everything else that's going on in the water industry. And in my paperwork, there's the Freedom of Information email address if you need to talk to Ofwat. Now, on the assumption that you've been making Freedom of Information requests and EIR requests, don't be surprised if you get responses that reject your requests either partially or wholly for cited reasons. Now, if you feel that there's an unsatisfactory response to your requests, you are entitled to ask for an internal inquiry, and that should go to a legal department for reconsideration. And lastly, if the reconsideration is negative and you still feel you have a right to a reply, you can go direct to the Information Commission at the Information Commissioner's office and lodge a complaint. Now, the ICO recently have been finding very much in favour of campaign groups, and particularly up in Windermere, where United Utilities have been very, very difficult in their answering of EIRs, and the Commission have been finding in favour of the group up in Windermere on several occasions within the last few weeks. I think it's probably time to open up to questions, if that's okay.
Yeah. There's a lot we've covered.
Yeah, it's wide ranging, and I just realised that people will have very focused interests, and I want to try and draw out of this what those are and try and assist where possible. So,
well, we've got one question actually from Jennifer. So how many works on the even load are actually treat all sites, and how many have reed beds? Do you have an idea?
Um, I'm just thinking my way up the even load, and just off the top of I have the documentation. Whoever's asked that question, I can actually send it in a meticulous spreadsheet format. Now, there are about 4 treat all sites on the even load. There is Morton in Marsh with a land treatment area. I believe Milton under Wychwood has a small aerated reed bed. But give me the details of who's asked for that and I'll send it in proper form.
Thank you.
It's better than trying to answer it off the cuff.
No, that's fine. You know, we asked. We don't expect you to know absolutely everything.
God, I learn every day.
I have a question, Geoff.
Yeah.
Okay, so if people want to seek out this information, and they find something that they find intriguing or worrying, what should they do with it?
Right.
You know, how can they use this information to create positive change in their community?
Jennifer, you've touched on something which is actually very dear to me. We all spend a lot of time kick sampling. We all spend a lot of time looking at results from sondes. I spend a huge amount of time analysing flow data, but it's absolutely no good doing any of those things without using the results to good effect. Now, I use those results, or we in W.A.S.P use those results to inform the public via the media. So we deal with the Financial Times, the Times, the Guardian, the Independent. I use the data that I analyse and where I find illegal activity to directly communicate with Thames Water and say, I have found this. I believe you to be operating illegally. What are you doing about it? There are certain things in new permits where dates in the future are set for certain actions to be executed in treatment works. For argument's sake, by 31st of March 2025, the flow to full treatment is going to be changed from to. I make a diary note. I contact Thames Water and say, has it happened? I contact the agency and say, have you been informed? Has this happened? So it's a sort of policing thing in the background.
Can I just add a little bit to what Geoff has said there as well? And Geoff's focus is very much on the flow. We're not seeing a lot of treatment works that are failing their consent conditions, which is intriguing and a bit frustrating, because what you'll see if you look in the streams is there is a big impact there. Now, I think if you look at the history, it's easy to understand what's happened. We had a period just after privatization of the water companies where there was investment, and a lot of work was done by the Environment Agency, or National Rivers Authority as it was then,
yeah,
to improve the consents. But that kind of fizzled away 5 years after privatization. And you've got the water companies not spending any money, and funding for the Environment Agency was reduced as well. So they weren't keeping their eye on the ball. So as well as the flow information, which is important, it's worth noting the consent conditions. But what we're more interested in is the impact on the river, because the river hasn't got any bigger, but there's been a lot of development, and the water companies haven't spent anything on investment. So gradually, bit by bit, we're getting this chronic problem where there isn't enough dilution in the river. They still seem to be able to comply with their consent conditions, but the flow has increased, and as far as we can tell from the Environment Agency monitoring, they're not really breaching their consent conditions, but we're seeing a big impact. So it's worth, none of us need to be on this call. It should all be done by the water companies and the National Rivers Authority.
Yeah.
But, there is a real problem here that's been missed, and we can fill that gap, hopefully.
Rob, you're so right. But one of the problems is operator self-monitoring and the way that monitoring of emission limits is done. We know, and we are beginning to put evidence together, that there's selective timings when the limits are checked, and we're seeing certain treatment works locally where there are huge ammonia spikes during the night. Now, why? And they go way beyond even upper tier limits in some cases, not just lookup table limits. And you're right, more and more people, there's more and more population, and the ensuing effluent is going into the same river. And in some ways, I would say less of a river. I think the flow in all our local rivers, the Evenlode, the Cherwell, the Tame, and the Windrush, has gone down in my lifetime. Not necessarily from abstraction. I don't know quite why.
So what can I ask, what would you suggest to somebody who was concerned about maybe development, plans for development in their local area? What
Excellent. Right.
if they want to show that actually it's going to be detrimental to the river and overcapacity, kind of what pathway would you recommend that they follow as far as gathering information requests?
Right. What Windrush Against Sewage Pollution are doing regularly and very often is making objections to or comments to planning applications where we know that the local treatment works are not capable of dealing with the increased load. We've done it in Church Hamborough on the Evenlode. I'm working on one in Swindon this morning. And what you need to do is have proof that the treatment works is not coping. Now, you can do this at a very, very broad level. You can just look at the spill record. And if you've got a treatment works that's regularly spilling 2,000 hours a year, you can safely say that every single household that's added to that particular network is adding to the spilling drastically. But we've got scientific ways of proving that works are below capacity. I've also got data on what's known as design capacity, and this is all works have a design capacity that is quoted by Thames Water. Unfortunately, a lot of them have an asterisk next to them and say not yet assessed. I don't accept that. As far as I'm concerned, that's the design capacity. There is also some historical documents which are pre-Brexit. On an annual basis, the water companies had to report into the EU Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive what the load entering a treatment works was and what its design capacity was. This applied to all treatment works serving a population equivalent over 2,000. It's a useful document because, as you'll probably be aware, in those 5-6 years since we left Brexit, there's not been many hydraulic upgrades to treatment works. Now, we've also got Church Hamborough is a classic. Church Hamborough has a flow to full treatment limit of something like 50.5 litres per second. Thames Water admitted to us on a visit there that they were diverting to storm at 45 litres a second, i.e. we're acting illegally. So we, in our objections to any developing Church Hamborough network, we're putting in an objection to Milton under Wychwood, Whitney, Oxford. We've got
Well, are we losing Geoff or is Geoff losing us?
I think Geoff is losing us. He's gone all crackly.
Hold on a minute, Geoff. We're losing you.
Template. Anybody is interested in making a comment on a specific planning application, it's a nice format. Have you got me?
Geoff, can you hear us?
No. I can hear you clear. Yes.
Fabulous. I think we just lost the last 30 seconds or so of you.
It was probably I said that Windrush Against Sewage Pollution have a pro forma for comments to be made on new developments where we feel that the local treatment works, or network for that matter, cannot cope. There are some instances where you will obviously know that a network can't cope, let alone a treatment works. And the classic locally is Bryce Norton, which floods on an annual basis at a big pumping station, is tankered on a regular basis, and nothing has been done for 14 years by Thames Water to alleviate the problem. Plus ça change. I suppose that reminds me, if you feel at a, let's call it your adopted treatment works, if you feel there is a lot of tanker activity, I think you need to be aware. Most small rural works will receive 1 or 2 tankers a week, and the purpose of those tankers will be to remove settled sludge, which is part of the treatment process, and that sludge will be taken out to a local works in our area, that's Witney, where it goes through further treatment. In Witney, it's only dewatered under centrifuge and then goes on to bigger works like Swindon or Oxford for final treatment, either through bioreactors or into sewage sludge for treatment out in the fields. You've all seen those big black piles, I'm sure. That's basically sewage sludge, full of antimicrobials, full of forever chemicals, full of micro and nanoparticles, and we're spreading it on the soil. It has been banned in some continental countries like Holland already.
So are you saying that basically the sewage, the cake, that is only treated to remove the water, excess water, and so
it's heat treated, it's limed in some instances, and in others it'll go into anaerobic digestion. There's multiple uses, and there's a wonderful document. Each and every water company has what's known as its bioresource document on an annual basis. It lists all treatment works, it lists all works that treat sludge treatment, STCs. I was just trying. We work on acronyms. Sludge treatment centres and the nature of them. Some of them, as I said, only dewater, and then the result of the dewatering goes off in lorries to final treatment centres. But ultimately, a lot of what's produced in the sludge treatment centres ends up for use in agriculture.
Mm-hmm. So they're only just treating for pathogens then in the biodigesters. Is it just like a heat treatment and then it's clear to go?
Exactly. I mean, I would assume, now I don't know much about anaerobic anaerobic digestion. Rob, you probably know a lot more about it, don't you, with your background?
I can't hear you, Rob. I don't know why.
Oh.
No. Not yet. Sorry.
Is that any better?
Yes.
Yep.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, not really my field, but they're really trying to break down the organic matter. Well, true in any sewage works, trying to break down the organic matter so it's not as polluting. Now, if you're going to use it as cake on farmland, then you probably want to keep as much of that organic content as possible, because it'll provide the nitrates, the phosphates, and fertilizers you want to help grow your crops. But yeah, it's not going to remove things like pollutants and metals are not really a problem for rural sewage works like ours. In the Black Country, where you've got a lot of iron foundries, chemical works, then I think they're a bit more restricted as to what they can spread on farmland. Now, but what we will have in our intake from our sewage works will be the forever chemicals, the pharmaceuticals and stuff like that. I don't know the route and how it breaks down when it's spread on farmland. I can't advise on that, I'm afraid.
Okay, but it sounds like we could possibly get this bioresource documentation and learn more about where it goes from the even load.
I'm just trying to think about that. There is on the public register a list of all S3 permits, and these are locations where the sewage sludge is stored. And if you drill down on it, you can see the water company that has provided it. And ironically, if you look in your area up there in the Cotswolds, there's a lot of stuff coming in from Wessex Water, Severn Trent. They cross borders. It's a very lucrative part of the business and absolutely necessary. Oh, sorry, I was talking about tankers. Yes, your rural works will receive a limited amount of tankers on a probably not a daily basis, but 1 or 2 a week for the smaller works, and their purpose is to remove the sludge. If you see a lot of tanker activity, it could be likely to a breakdown at the works, and it's quite important to note that. If you do see that and you have some concern about it, you can ask Thames Water for tanker logs. They're very comprehensive. They have tanker registration, time on site, destination, content of load, all sorts of interesting things. Now, I use them quite a lot when we've got obvious breakdowns in places like Kingston Bagpues, Stand Lake, and you'd be surprised of the amount of tankers that are used to flow. It's called flow management. Intersiting, which is the movement of sludge, necessary movement of sludge, is okay. It's expensive and it's not particularly carbon neutral, but it's the flow management that we are particularly interested in, and it's a sign of breakdowns in the system. We had Southley, which is close to Witney, Southley Sewage Treatment Works was closed down for the best part of a year, and we estimated the volume and the potential cost of just the tankering whilst the repair work was done on site there. It was eye-watering.
Mm. But I mean, what we're trying to say is that if there's a tanker going to your local sewage treatment works, they're not necessarily putting more pressure on the sewage treatment works by delivering.
No, it's taking away. It's almost certainly taking away. And there's one way of doing of checking that. If you're on site and you see it, most of the tankers have a side tube, and it's a clear plastic tube going up the side behind the cab. And if it's coming in empty, you can't see anything in the side tube. If it's going out full, you can see the brown stuff in the side tube.
Good to know.
Geoff, I know that the Thames Water was talking about taking the cake or the sludge and using it for pyrolysis. Do you know, is that actually happening at all, or is that just something that was mentioned to try and appease people?
No, I don't know, and I can research and ask the question. I put
it was mentioned, I think, at by one of the Thames Water representatives at, I think, the meeting where we showed the ECP film Beneath the Surface at Farm Ed. Yeah. It was mentioned then that they were looking into that. Was
this in relationship to Oxford Sewage Treatment Works?
I don't remember. I just remember they were saying that that was a possible way to use it or to get rid of it.
Okay, well, I've got your name against that.
Okay, good. The other thing I was wondering about, because people have asked me in the past, finding out where water is extracted from, because I know that people are talking about local streams drying up and whatnot, and wondering how they can get information. Is that just an information request to Thames Water or the Environment Agency to find out where water is extracted from, or where their drinking water comes from in general? You know, is the water for the Eden load coming from a reservoir, or is it actually coming from the rivers?
Right. I think the cue there is to be a bit mischievous and ask both the Environment Agency and Thames Water the same question.
Okay.
Now, as you know, there's a lot of water transfer, and one of the biggest suppliers in this area is the big reservoir over at Farmore. But a lot of that water is transferred across from Severn Trent territory. There's huge pipe work going across below Farringdon. Now, case in hand, Lower Swell or Upper Swell, I can't remember. There is an abstraction facility and a treatment facility on the upper. I'm just trying to think of the river. It's up near Donington, just downstream of the brewery.
Okay.
The Dickler of the Eye.
Oh, which reminds me, brewery effluent is highly toxic.
Really? That's of interest. Thank you.
Yeah, it is particularly, and we have discovered that a certain Mr. Clarkson, who has his name on a brewery in Bourton-on-the-Water, has been given by the Environment Agency, by Thames Water's Trade Effluent Department, an application form which he has ignored.
Oh. Interesting.
Now, at some stage, I want to come up and have a look at that outfall. It was reputed to be pretty grim.
Yeah, it is.
It would be typical of Clarkson to wave two fingers at authority.
All media is good media.
Indeed.
Pardon?
All media
Oh,
is
sorry,
good
I
media.
did hear that.
I've just had a question pop up. Let me have a look. And
Yeah.
do you want to ask it, or do you want me to read it out?
Read it out.
I'll read it out.
Read it out.
Read it.
Just wondering, Geoff.
Oh, yeah.
What do you see as the most useful thing that any of us citizen scientists can do in terms of monitoring or observations to add any real value to the work that you have been doing? It sometimes feels as if we are not able to do anything very useful with all the data that we have been collecting. So it's interesting to know your view.
I think it's such a pertinent question, because I'm so aware that there are so many citizen scientists beavering away, getting results, logging results. And I do see on many occasions, quite often, people drop out because they feel what they're doing is actually having no results. Now, what can you do? You have to contact, I would suggest, as I've said earlier, the press, the Environment Agency, and the water company itself, pointing out where you feel that you have identified irregularities, excesses, or anything which is contributing negatively to the environment. I know that's a fairly off the cuff, and what's your slant on this?
Well, it concerns me that we're collecting, as you say, loads of data, and then of course nobody will actually accept our data by and large, because they say it's too variable or whatever. So it hasn't got credence in law, and all the things we can do with river flies takes forever to set up and then get and then it feels really a bit too little too late by the time you've actually got to the point where you're able to say, yes, it's going to get the Environment Agency out. It still feels like it's just putting us into the long grass so that we can go and feel we're doing something and not actually having any real impact. So I'm just really keen to see how do we, apart from expensive things like songs and so on, which people can't from, where's the best place for us to really be focusing effort? It feels like with the water companies, it's sort of almost like a done deal. And you know, is there much use in us being, as I always say, like the neighbourhood watch, to stop Brinks-Mac robbery? You know, it's you know, how do we?
I can emphasize, yeah, I know where you're coming from, and I think we were in that kind of situation a couple of years ago. We're doing a lot of work, and I think sheer persistence, and now in arguments say, look, off what declared Windrush against sewage, but suddenly realised they needed to do. And I think if you feel what you're doing has got potential and positive results, it's persistence, and it can be really, really draining.
Yeah, it can. But this,
And
this
you know, and don't let this rubbish where people say, you know, CS results are worthless. They're not. They're actually often better thought through, better thought out, and better positioned location-wise than the professionals do. Because so often the professionals cite their testing in some ways, in very deliberate ways, to produce
hang on, Geoff,
we're
we're losing you again.
We've seen evidence of that up in the Lake District. I hand over. Can you hear me?
I can just about hear you. We lost you at the point where you were saying that citizen scientists locate their tests in much better positions than the Environment Agency.
I sincerely believe that, because they're looking at the agency. I have to say it cynically, looking for good results, let's call them good, where they don't have to react and do too much. Citizen scientists are looking for results that have impacted on the river, and they're going to think much more carefully about the locations.
I think a really good example of that, Geoff, is recently we saw that the Environment Agency was doing a fish survey up beside the Windrush, and they were on the Eye and the Dickler, which neither one actually have a sewage treatment facility on them. So they were actually upstream of the sewage treatment facility and finding very favorable results. And when they were asked about why they were testing there, because it seems like an obvious place to find healthy fish populations, their response was, well, it was totally randomized, and you know, we need to do that to just ensure that the data is, you know, kind of legit. And I just disagree with that.
Didn't buy it.
Well, what do fish do naturally if there's pollution? They move upstream. It's dead simple.
Yeah.
You know, what do you do if there's a tsunami? You go up the mountain.
Yeah. Exactly. So I think it's important to always question the results. And as you said at the beginning of the webinars, is to be really conscious of how you're phrasing your question, because that will be shown in the response that you get. You know, if you ask a fluffy question, you're going to get a fluffy answer. But also that they can be overwhelmed by the number of questions that come in. So if you're really articulate, you'll get more value for your time and for their time as well, because they have reduced staff, and you know, we do want the answers. We don't want them overwhelmed to the point where they can no longer you know, respond.
It's been one of the recent problems with the high level of publicity. A lot of people are beginning to make FOI, EIR requests. I've had Thames Water ask me, can I ease off? And just said, I'm sorry, I can't. You know, that's not on, I'm afraid. You know, your job is to up staff.
Yeah.
Just quickly, because I'm looking at time, sort of going back to what we were discussing before about how we can use our data to make a difference. Jan said, you know, there's been a recent request from landowners from West Oxfordshire District Council to potentially build another 98 houses plus a potential 320 houses in Milton, Ascot and Shipston. And yeah, I think, we'll just go back to saying, actually, when we can get this data and evidence that there's an issue and that these sewage treatment works are not behaving as they should, that's where this is going to be an important thing to do of adopting that sewage treatment works and finding that evidence to go then to the local district councils.
Yeah, I think the adoption idea is just lovely. It's the antithesis to what I do, and I just love the idea. If I could spend all my time at Whitney Sewage Treatment Works, I'd be a happy man.
So I guess if there's anybody from the Windrush that wants to do that, it would be great if we had, citizen scientists or just concerned locals adopting sewage treatment facilities and following that data, but also reporting back to us.
Yeah.
I think that would be really, really helpful, because we do have a limited amount of staff time that we can dedicate to these things, and be able to.
Well, there's a little group on the Shilbrook, Anne, I've just forgotten her name, is involved with Windrush against sewage pollution, and out of Bampton, and Carterton is also on the Shilbrook, which ultimately goes down to the Great Brook and the Thames. But there's quite an active group in Bampton. You need to make contact.
Is there any possibility of being able to share? Geoff, thank you so much for the offer of your crib sheets. And I was just thinking that when it comes to being as efficient as we can in making objections, for Jan with Milton and for us with Finstock and Charlbury, being able to get hold of those crib sheets, so we've got those as a sort of starting point, and we're not reinventing any wheels.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I've got them. I've got them for Finstock, got them for Charlbury, got them for Chadlington, Coombe. All the works in that area.
If that's something that Jen and Sam could sort of hold and circulate to anybody who asks, that would be really, really helpful. Thank you, Geoff.
Excellent.
On the communications that Geoff has written and I've shared in the chat, make sure you download that before you disappear. He has got the EIR email addresses for all of the water companies within the UK on there. The Environment Agency details remain the same, but yeah, you don't have to have been on the even load to be able to take advantage of what Geoff has shared with us today.
Definitely not. No.
Fab, well,
what's the question from Jan? I can't quite read it all.
Quick question. Why are sewage treatment works sometimes very smelly? What does this mean?
It's normally the sludge that smells. If you walk around a sewage treatment works, which many of us have done, and I have done it on countless occasions, the inlet works doesn't really smell very badly. One of the things that causes a treatment works to smell is poor retention in storm tanks. Instead of storm tanks, once they've finished doing their job, i.e. everything's been returned to flow to full treatment, are meant to be cleaned out. Some of them are automatically cleaned out, and others rely on a bloke in Wellington boots and a pressure washer. Now, you'll know the smell over at Primrose Court at Morton in Marsh is, I believe, almost exclusively the storm tanks which aren't cleaned out properly. Now, sludge itself is quite odorous, and most reasonable sized works now have covered sludge storage facilities, but it's the sludge or the not properly maintained storm tanks that cause most of the odor. Yeah. It was one of the surprises I had when I first started going to treatment works, how you go to the inlet works and you see all the feces and stuff coming in. It doesn't smell.
I was surprised actually when we visited the Morton and Marsh sewage treatment works, the lack of smell. I was expecting a bit more, which leads me on actually. If you have not visited a sewage treatment works and you would like to, please get in touch with myself, and I can arrange something. Especially if we're based on the even load, we can get a small group together. But generally, the staff that work for Thames Water at these sewage treatment works are so friendly and they want to help us. and you know they've welcomed me plenty of times to go and see them, and invite is open to us.
Yeah, try and get a visit to somewhere like Coombe. Interesting little works.
Okay, maybe we'll do that. Stay out.
Or Chipping Norton.
Fab. If there are no other questions, we should call that a wrap.
Thank you very much, Geoff.
Thanks, everybody. I've rambled, I know, but do contact me.
No, it's been really interesting.
You've been an absolute inspiration, and hopefully we have encouraged a couple of people that were on the webinar to take some action and get some more information.
Thanks, Harriet, for that comment. I've just seen it. Excellent.
You,
okay,
everyone.
I'm off to Dorchester sewage treatment works now.
Oh, have fun.
Have a good time.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.